This is the second part of the SEIKO 6159 shrouded diver teardown, and getting straight into it, I've just removed the crystal holding ring there, and you can see a lot of dirt everywhere as well, but there's the thread that it's threaded in with. That's actually quite delicate, so you've got to be very careful when removing these, because if that's stripped, then you've really got a big problem on your hands. And now we're looking at the front of the dial, and I'm just trying to remove the crystal, and as I'm doing that, that's the crystal spacer ring, so that's made out of nylon, and just trying to remove the crystal there using a plastic tool. These can be a little bit difficult, especially if they've got some dirt and stuff on them. So I've taken that off camera, which just sort of prevents me from damaging anything, because it's a little bit hard to work in front of the camera. And you'll see the dial there, and hands and so on. What's very common with these is that the markers will go slightly more yellow than the hands, and I suspect that's because the binder that's used on the luminous material when the dials are pad printed is different to the hands and ages differently. Now we're just having a look at the crystal there, excuse me, which is a unique shape, and it's got a step in it as well, and that step is where the spacer ring sits. And just measuring the crystal, it's quite thick. So that's in millimeters. So yeah, just probably the dimension there is getting thrown off by a bit of dirt. So I would say 4 millimeters. And just another look at that groove there. And just on the side there, you can see the bevel. And we're just going to come back to the watch itself again now, and just turn it around. And you'll see there it's got a ring, and the crystal gasket sits inside that ring. Now we've removed that, and you can see the dial ring. The crystal gasket's a fairly typical L-style gasket with a step in it, which they use quite a lot during this time, and we're just going to get a few views of it. So they're fairly unique. It's very hard to find any sort of aftermarket part that'll work there. And just coming back to the movement again, I've just removed the dial ring, and you'll see another gasket there as well. So that's actually an O-ring that sits on top of the movement, and it's called the movement holding gasket. So that sits on top of the movement, as you can see there. I'm just putting it in place, and then the dial ring sits on top of that, just like that, and that actually just pushes the movement down and stops it from moving around. Now I'm just going to pull the stem out, and the stem release lever you can see right there. And I'm going to be very careful here, because one slip of the screwdriver and you can easily go through the dial, which will ruin the dial. And as you can see there, I've just adjusted the way I was doing it because I didn't feel confident, and there we go, and the stem's out. So it's a fairly typical stem of the SEIKO divers. So they're a two-part stem. So they've got a front part and a back part, and well, actually it's a three-part. So it's got the spring as well. And that's fairly typical of the way that their later divers were made. For example, the 6309 is the same. Now we're just going to take the hands off, and to do this, I generally like to put a sheet of plastic over the dial. And the reason I like to do that is that then if there's just no way you can really damage anything. So I've got some of those Bergian dial protectors, but I generally prefer to use an old bit of plastic. Now I've just turned the movement over now, and you can see the train side of the movement. And anyone with a sharp eye will spot the differences straight away between the 6159 and the other 61 series movements. So overall the level of finish is a lot better, and there's a few other bits and pieces that are different. You'll see that the balance is completely different to a normal 61 series. So it's a smaller balance wheel, and obviously they're a high beat movement, and they've also got the screw adjuster there for doing fine tuning of regulation. And the rotor is much more nicely finished than the standard 61s. Also the screws are different on these, so they've got excuse the plane just going over there. So the screws on these are much nicer as well. They're a flat finish rather than the standard rounded finish, and they're very highly polished, as are all the edges on the plates there, which you can see. The rotor's got a different finish on it. The standard rotors are unfinished, and these ones do have a grained pattern on them. And we're just turning over to the date side there, so I've taken the dial off and just removing the plate there, which holds in the date wheel. And there's a few screws, and I'm just trying to do this very carefully. The date side isn't, well, the calendar side of this movement isn't finished anywhere near as nicely as the train side. It's pretty much the standard 61 series finish on the train side. I'm just removing those screws now, carefully. I did film this video quite some time ago, so I've had this sitting around, just haven't had time to edit it or anything like that. I think nearly a year ago I filmed this. Okay, so the plate's coming off now, and I'm just turning it around just to try and get a good grip on it. You'll notice a few more differences when this is off between the standard 61 movement and the 6159. So you'll see the bottom jewel on the escape wheel is a permanently capped jewel, so you can't remove the cap from that. The jewel for the third wheel has got a Diafix jewel on there, which I'm not going to remove on camera because they're just way too difficult. But the other thing you'll notice is that the the cannon pinion's actually quite a lot fatter than the standard cannon pinion, which was a common theme among the shrouded divers of the time. I think with the 7C46, I think they went to a standard size cannon pinion, but at this time they used an oversized one, which means an oversized hour wheel as well. So we're just removing the date click there. And now I'm just removing the cover plate for the winding intermediate wheel. Well, this, I think it's a setting wheel actually, so it's probably the incorrect term. And we're just going to have to remove the date or the calendar intermediate wheel, so we can just move that and take off the hour wheel. There we go. And you can see that fat cannon pinion there. I'm just going to remove that. And I think from memory this one was a little bit tough, so we're just going to give that another go. It's going to hold it down with a toothpick, and we'll remove that. The keyless works on this movement are very similar to the 6138. They both pretty much have similar features, and they've got the same setting lever. Those screws are always quite firmly screwed in, so sometimes they can be difficult to remove. And now I'm just taking off the that little plate there. Now you'll see under there as well, that's actually jeweled, which on the standard 61 series it's just a pivot. Okay, so that's off, and we got one of those springs in there which tends to go ping, so we'll just work out the best way to attack that. Being that I filmed this so long ago, I don't remember what I did, but what we're going to do is just remove it with some Rodico, which is usually the easiest way to do it. So rather than trying to pull it out with tweezers and toothpicks and stuff and losing it on the floor, the Rodico just pulls it straight out, and then it's easy enough to remove after that, and we haven't lost anything. Now that's the little lever that allows you to remove the movement from the front. And that's the stem release lever. That's got a little cover plate on it, very similar to the 6138, which holds everything in. And I've nearly got all that off now. This lever can be a little bit fiddly. You'll see the little bat wing thing there, which the 6138 has as well. And the yoke is just there, which is exactly the same as the 6138. And that's the cat. So another good thing about this movement is that there's basically jewels everywhere. So wear is a lot less of an issue. But then again, being such a high-end movement, you'd kind of expect that. The calendar wheel there is exactly the same as the other 61 series. Now we've just flipped over to the train side, which is probably going to be a lot more interesting. And with a slightly closer shot, you can actually see the improved finish on these plates. The other thing that is different on this movement as well is the winding bearing, as in the one on the automatic framework, actually sits a lot taller and is a lot fatter. Why they made that decision, I'm not quite sure, but yeah, it is different, so you can't sort of swap plates. So I've just removed the balance there, and you can see the pallet cock Now these have a gold pallet cock, and it's a completely different shape to the standard 61 series pallet cock. And I'm just going to remove that in a sec. Now I've already let the power down on this movement, so normally you wouldn't do this unless you'd actually done that first. And with these you usually can't do it without removing the automatic framework. But between the last sort of lot of videos and this one, it's wound down. And we're just removing the automatic framework there. You'll see as well on the barrels they have printed on top of them do not open. There's a good reason for that. The mainspring that they put inside of these is quite strong, so SEIKO decided that the barrels were going to be permanently sealed. Now to seal them, they actually bend the edges of the barrel over, so you can't get it open. The only way to get it open is to machine that off, which I'm probably not really game to do. So unless there's a major problem with the barrel, I'm just going to leave it well alone. And of course, a replacement barrel for these is basically impossible to find. Now I just put the toothpick on there because sometimes they can jump a bit when you take them off. And you can see it's very similar to the other 61 series. But what isn't similar is the train plate here. So that large wheel there next to the ratchet wheel is actually the winding wheel. So that allows you to have the auxiliary hand winding, which the normal 61 series doesn't have. So we're just removing the ratchet wheel at the moment. And you can see very simply how it works. You just turn the stem, and there's a pinion wheel on that stem, which turns that winding wheel, which then turns the ratchet wheel, which winds the barrel. So it's extremely simple. And also looking from the top there, you can see the third wheel's not got a die fix on it. The fourth wheel is jeweled, and the escape wheel is jeweled as well, which is pretty standard with the 61 series. And we're just removing the click now. Another thing with these as well is that they do actually have a different gear train. Particularly the fourth wheel is a slightly finer pitch gear, and it's better finished than the standard 61 series. I assume that's to do with it being a high beat movement, and they decided to put a finer gear pitch on it. I seem to be taking forever to get this off. It's actually quite... when I do this, I'm kind of doing it at an angle. I haven't been able to work out a really good place to put the camera just yet. And I don't have a macro lens for it. So it's a bit of a juggle to try and work out where to put it. But we're nearly there. And that's the last screw there. And I'll just take that plate off now. And of course it's fallen down inside my holder. Okay, so you can see there the upper jewel on the barrel is, well, there actually is a jewel there. So normally those are bushed on a standard 61 series. So the additional jewels there actually are quite functional. If we're looking at the rest of the gears there, you can see the fourth wheel is a different shape to the standard 61 series and has a finer gear pitch on it, so we'll just remove that. The third wheel I think is the same as the standard 61 series, and you'll see that there's the hacking lever, which is I think a common part as well. So that will be the same as the 6106 and 6105. And I'm just moving it there so you can see how it works. So when you move the stem, it just locks into the escape wheel and just stops the movement. It's extremely simple. And just removing the pallet cock there, and probably the pallet fork's going to go with it. The pallet fork's a better finished pallet fork than the 61 series, and it's slightly different as well, but there's no major visible differences. The escape wheel obviously is going to have more teeth on it than the standard one, and it's better finished. See if I can get a good view of that. So you can see there it's got a lot more teeth. If you compare that with the standard 61 series escape wheel, it's got quite a lot more teeth on it. So just removing the barrel there, and we managed to flip over the movement. This is actually an experimental holder, and I didn't use it again after this. Also, the tweezers I'm using are titanium tweezers, and they can be a little bit too bendy. And because there's a bit of dirt on it, the barrel's a bit stuck, which is pretty common. So I'm just going to move over to the center wheel plate there, and it's actually got a different jewel in the middle. It's larger than normal. Now the barrel should be a bit easier to come out now. You can see the bottom in there of these is jeweled as well, so these are jeweled on the top and the bottom of the barrel, which really reduces wear. And there you have the plain plate with nothing on it. And that's the entire strip down of this movement. So if you look carefully, you'll definitely see the differences between this and say a 6119 or a 6139 or 6106 or whatever. Alright, thanks for watching, and I'll have some more as soon as possible.